Hello, Dr. Balthazar here. In my last video, we looked at the background and storyline of the Sci-Fi Channel's Dune from 2000, and of course by we, I mean me. Today I'm following up with the other elements of the standard film review with characters, world building, and themes, including a bit more compare and contrast between the three productions, so let's get back in the saddle. There's far too many characters to break down everyone, but let's consider how some of the main characters are presented. In the Sci-Fi Dune miniseries, Glasgow's own Alec Newman stars as Paul Atreides, a casting choice that feels off in the first half of the series, but works fine in the second. Part of the reason is, in the first half we're dealing with an inexperienced boy starting out on a hero's journey, and in the second we've moved forward in time and young Atreides has become a grown-ass man, leading men. So how do you cast for basically two different roles? The movie Revolution with Al Pacino and HBO series Rome tried to solve a similar problem of needing a boy for this section and a man for that section by casting a different actor for each, and it went over like a fart in church. The standard Hollywood approach in casting in general is to take someone in their mid to late 20s and then do something stupid with their hair to supposedly make them look younger. Yeah, there's a believably awkward teenage virgin right there. Sure thing, Madam Web. Sony Pictures don't ever change. So Sci-Fi Dune went with an actor presenting as an adult in Alec Newman. Crappy 80s Dune went with an actor presenting as an adult in Kyle MacLachlan. And Villeneuve's Dune went with an actor that presents more as a boy in Timothée Chalamet, though he was 25 at the time, so Hollywood rules still apply. Casting choices aside, it's fair to ask how the audience is supposed to feel about the main character as the story moves to a conclusion. I think when Herbert wrote Dune World in 1963, it was with the intention of Paul Atreides being a standard hero starting out on a hero's journey. But when he followed up in 1965 with Dune Prophet, he pivoted the character into a morally gray space to better communicate his philosophies and the perils of hero worship. Messiah figures, superheroes, or whatever term one uses for an individual to whom an unhealthy amount of adulation is paid and personal decision-making is deferred to, was an idea that sat uneasily with the author. So if you're making a film on Herbert's Dune, what audience reaction do you want people to have when the main character becomes the savior messiah in the finale? Crappy 80s Dune says fuck the moral ambiguity surrounding hero worship. He defeats the villains, makes everything perfect. Sci-Fi Dune is PG, so it says shucky darns, fiddlesticks, surrounding the moral ambiguity of hero worship and the galactic jihad. He's the hero who saves the day and he gets the girl. And Villeneuve says, well, he overcomes the other characters, who we've presented as more villainous than he. But by the end of part 2, he isn't entirely a heroic figure anymore. And launching a galactic jihad isn't necessarily a positive good. So the groundwork is there for a follow-up that finishes his story as a hero, villain, or something in between that still makes logical sense. In the Sci-Fi Dune, Leto Atreides is played by William Hurt. What a fascinating career he had on stage and screen. Over 100 acting credits and however many awards. In the novel, the Duke doesn't have an overabundance of lines or scenes. He's more of a concept of duty and honor to contrast with the Harkonnens' representation of conniving and self-interest. So the miniseries gives him about as much time as the book, which is hardly enough to feel as lost the way we're meant to, or take advantage of Hurt's talent. Crappy 80s Dune has the same issue with Jürgen Prochnow in the role, but they don't really have time to develop any characters, since it's fitting a tome of a novel into 2 hours. They try to work around that by having Leto and every other character endlessly whispering internal monologues that are obnoxious beyond my ability to properly convey. There may be more internal monologues than dialogue, fucking thing. But I guess they figured, well, needs must. Villeneuve's Dune puts a few characters in the back burner in part 1 to provide more time for Oscar Isaac to flesh out the Leto character as a father, husband, and loyal servant to both his people and the crown, and it pays off better. We feel his loss of greater impact, and can better comprehend Paul's desire for revenge at a very high price. The villains have a greater range of interpretation by the three filmmakers. Crappy 80s Dune approaches Baron Harkonnen as an overtly gay screamer with leprosy. He bellows of rage a good amount. Villeneuve approaches the Baron as a reticent albino with an aversion to body hair and charisma. He sits quietly quite a bit. Sci-Fi Dune eschews the visual approach for the main villain and lets Ian McNeice run with his performance of an arrogant, grandiose chicken shit heel, and in my opinion it's the approach that works best. His performance gives a character a personality the audience can respond to in a more meaningful way than the visual deformity of the other two. And when he finally gets got, it's a got to sucker moment rather than a moment of relative indifference. Also, the greater the visual contrast between the Atreides and Harkonnen, the more lines like, "You have a wonderful kick, cousin," don't land. If these families are actually related, they have to look the part on some level. So this guy is father to this girl and grandfather to that boy. Righto. If the two houses are opposite sides of the same coin, in a Cold War allegory for the US and USSR, making them similar in more ways than either care to admit, their differences have to be grounded in their value systems, not the aesthetics of appearance or even their behaviors. But, okay, whatever. For the two minor villains, Beast Raban and Feyd-Rautha, I still think Herbert is drawing from Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo, with one being a savage brute of a man that is physically imposing, but not necessarily a meaningful threat since he's dumb as fuck. and the other a handsome Dan who is the greater threat because he's the schemer, and it's the schemers you have to watch out for. Crappy 80s Dune presents these two as cliché villains who are villains for the sake of villainy, and that's just how the cookie crumbles. They say little and do less. It doesn't help that neither of them can act, although to be fair, acting isn't how Sting paid his rent back in the 80s. Hey, no, don't. You're only encouraging him at this point. Sci-Fi Dune also has Beast Raban as pretty one-dimensional. He's angry because he's angry, so there he is being angry. Although it tries to draw some parallels between Feyd and Paul as capable and intelligent heirs to their respective houses, developing the Feyd character to some degree. Villeneuve Dune held out their Feyd-Rautha until the second film, which left him feeling like a Johnny-come-lately to the party, also tying him so close to the presentation of the Baron, with the look and Austin Butler's choice of pantomiming Stellan Skarsgård's speech patterns, makes it a bit hard to create parallels with Timothée Chalamet's Paul Atreides. Beast Raban ended up being the only villain in Villeneuve's movies that I found interesting, for whatever my 2 cents are worth. My suspicion is they're worth 2 cents.
Utah! Give me 2!
The people who are most often bullied are the unintentionally obnoxious, dim-witted, and weak, and an unfortunate number of them end up becoming bullies themselves as an ego defense mechanism. They learn how to be just like their tormentors, so as not to be tormented by them, and in turn torment others. It's a vicious circle. Well, no, that's not right. It's not a vicious circle. It's a downward spiral. Dave Bautista's Raban gives the impression he's someone born to a role he doesn't have the potential to fulfill. Likely bullied when young for being uncool, dim-witted, or afraid, and instead of becoming a better person over time, made more understanding of others by his own hardships, he overcompensates with anger and violence to protect an absence of self-esteem. You can almost feel sorry for him until he starts talking or hurting someone. Not so different from the bullies many of us have seen in our travels. When it comes to the baby girls, Sci-Fi Dune invested far more than the novel in the Emperor's daughter Irulan. This allowed for much more insight into the Emperor, reinforced the parallels between Paul and Feyd as competing suitors, and Julie Cox really sells the beautiful but deadly Temptress role. Villeneuve holds Irulan out of the first film, then entrenches her in the Bene Gesserit space bitch camp for reasons. And Crappy 80s Dune doesn't do enough to merit mentioning her or Chani, whatever. I don't think there's universal agreement on the pronunciation of the love interest name. Or I don't care. One or the other or something else. In the novel, the girl of Paul's dreams seems like a character Herbert either lost interest in or never had strong ideas for in the first place. She's just sort of there, and in the Sci-Fi Dune, Barbara Kodatova as Chani is just sort of there with an accent. Villeneuve chose to develop Zidania's Chani as a separate entity from the male lead, which is interesting. She counterpoints ideas related to the Savior-Messiah concept, which is good. By contesting ideas, you can give them depth and make them more understandable to viewers through repetition. Although Villeneuve has distanced her from the source material's plot in a way that he may struggle to reel back in story-wise. We'll see when we see. In Herbert's novel, Lady Jessica is an ethically ambiguous character that has maternal connections to House Atreides, but she's also a card-carrying member of the Bene Gesserit space bitches who have their own agenda. And first and foremost, she's a survivor, who serves self above all others. None of the film projects seem comfortable approaching the character with that much nuance. In the Crappy 80s Dune, she's just a bit of a crier that's around crying because the source material has her around, not because they had any ideas for her. In the Sci-Fi Dune, she has her moral dilemma with the water of life that I discussed in my last video, but after the choice to drink the Kool-Aid, it struggles with what to do with her, because much like Paul in the third act, she's not exactly a hero anymore. She chose to survive by doing harm to her unborn child, and that's a sell your soul decision that ought not to be taken lightly. But they can't or won't explore it in any detail, so Saskia Reeves' Jessica is minimized to the rest of the series. Villeneuve completely fucks up the significance of the decision to drink the Kool-Aid by taking the choice right out of her hands, empowering modern women by showing them they won't have to make difficult decisions in life. Very inspiring. He also utilizes the character to develop the Savior-Messiah theme by having her work to connect her son with the Fremen prophecies, and on the whole does a better job of getting across that she's a survivor first and foremost. So how far will she go to protect her neck by sacrificing others? Hard to say, but pretty fucking far feels like the safe answer. There's a reason Leto asked her to protect Paul in episode 1. It's not supposed to be a foregone conclusion that that's what she'll do.
Will you protect our son?
With my life.
I'm not asking his mother, I'm asking the Bene Gesserit.
But at the same time, Villeneuve removes a lot of her personal responsibility for the choices she makes by keeping her daughter Alia unborn and acting as some kind of foreign corrupting influence that can take the blame for the immorality of her quest for personal revenge, prophecy fulfillment, and associated privilege. So modern women can be empowered by knowing they won't have to make difficult decisions in life, and whatever decisions are made on their behalf, they won't be responsible for. Yes, very inspiring. I'm sure that's a great message modern audiences can really resonate with. Bravo, Denis. Fucking guy. Worldbuilding relates to 2 general concepts for me: not breaking the suspension of disbelief necessary to play along with the movie, and the world the film actually built. Crappy 80s Dune struggles with suspension of disbelief anytime a special effect needs to get special. I don't know what this is. This is really something. Sci-Fi Dune struggles with suspension of disbelief when it comes to the costumes and some of the sets and special effects. It's not too jarring, but expectations need to be tempered for a made-for-TV series from 2000, you know? All three movies build the world of Dune as imagined by Frank Herbert, with its mechanics of interplanetary this, feuding dynastic houses that, such and such rules of technology and mystic powers, all the things. The only production that fucks with the world building is crappy 80s Dune. They make the concept of the Weirding Way, which is kinda like being able to move with greater speed and dexterity due to Bene Gesserit Space Bitch Yoga, into a voice-powered firearm. Yeah, it's a word gun. It fires sound bullets by barking with a dog collar on. The idea was this is a technological advantage that explains why the Emperor fears House Atreides, and they're able to win in a walk during the climactic battle at the end. But it's so stupid. You're barking sound bullets for fuck's sake. Welcome to the 80s, I guess. Thematically, there's a lot of philosophical meandering Herbert wants to do with his writings that the film productions emphasize and de-emphasize to varying degrees. Ecology, terraforming, and planetary life cycles are topics Herbert took an interest in, but the movies opt not to explore in depth. Herbert also had an ongoing theme related to the evolutionary fate of mankind vis-a-vis its destructive potential in the usual apocalyptic humans fuck up everything in nature by not recycling or driving electric cars or whatever the fuck, as well as a vision for how mankind will survive in the future. But all that is just starting to take shape at this point in the Dune saga. Herbert does a lot more LSD before that starts to become one of his favorite topics to blather on about. The dynamic of justice versus revenge is sort of there, but I don't think Herbert really comprehended the difference or cared over much.
Justice is about harmony. Revenge is about you making yourself feel better.
Cold War and colonialism allegories can be drawn with the competing houses. The theme of hero worship and the pitfalls of individual leaders with cult-like status is a significant part of Dune. The main character has to choose whether he wants to step into a prophesied savior messiah role, knowing it will cause a galactic jihad, but secure him the personal revenge he seeks. Although with so much collateral damage across the galaxy, maybe he isn't really honoring the ones he loved and lost with that decision. The long-term effects of this choice are already known to him, so he can't plead ignorance regarding the billions of people he harms after the fact. If he fulfills the Fremen prophecy as their savior messiah, he doesn't get to steer them away from the jihad. It's like drinking from the fire hose. It's all the way on or all the way off. It's a part of the novel's world building that the Fremen are a fighting force unmatched in the galaxy, and the coming of the Prophet means they're going to engage in unrestrained slaughter. So they're similar to the hydrogen bomb in that they can't be used with the strategic precision. You can either not drop the H-bomb, or indiscriminately annihilate everyone and everything with it. But this is a shaky concept when you consider some of the rules that govern the world of Dune. Range weapons are made obsolete by personal shields. Personal shields can only be breached by passing through them slowly. Slashing, stabbing, or chopping at speed causes the blade to be deflected just like a ranged weapon's projectile. Every soldier in the galaxy has built-in muscle memory to slow their attacks at the point of contact to compensate for the shield. Personal shields can't be used on Arrakis because the worms ain't having any of that shit, playboy. So ranged weapons are back on the table. The workaround for this is the knowledge of the desert terrain allows the Fremen to close distance, bringing combat back into melee range. The Fremen never learned to compensate for personal shields, so they don't slow their attacks at the point of contact, giving them the advantage in every unshielded fight on Arrakis. But Arrakis is the only planet in the galaxy with the space worms, so Arrakis is the only planet in the galaxy that doesn't use personal shields. This means that if these hillbillies fought on another planet, the muscle memory and the heat of battle that gives them a decisive advantage on their homeworld, along with the addition of the Weirding Way to their fighting style, which increases movement speed, will play directly into the functionality of the personal shield, and they would not only be killed by the bushel, they won't even land a grazing blow before they die. And that's if they could close the melee range in a non-desert terrain, which they cannot. And that's before we get into how they'd contend with a Navy and Air Force instead of ground infantry, which they cannot. You can't selectively choose where ultra-conservative, xenophobic tribal people will tenaciously cling to their cultural traditions and where they'll drop them in favor of things from a foreign culture. If they're open enough to foreign cultures to take on their technology, tactics, and fighting styles as avid learners, they can't simultaneously be so close to foreign cultures that they feel the need to annihilate them for the crime of not being them. This is what's known as being mutually exclusive. One thing cannot logically exist in tandem with the other. Herbert wrote Dune as the Vietnam War was ramping up. It makes sense that he would think guerrilla fighters are more effective than conventional armies based on the conflict in Vietnam at that specific moment in time. But if you drop the Viet Cong into Iowa or somewhere without a jungle, they best tell their ancestors they'll see them in person in about 5 minutes. Battlefield victory and defeat are based on a flexible application of many factors. The Fremen aren't going off-world and doing a goddamn thing except dying. Herbert and Sci-Fi Dune got around this by having the jihad happen off-screen. We'll see what Villeneuve does when he does what he does. Anyway, Dune has been a fascinating IP for nearly 60 years, and the Sci-Fi and Villeneuve Dunes are worth a watch since they do a great job with the story. Crappy 80s Dune I'd advise you to leave be, but I'm your bullshit fake doctor, not your dad, so do as you will. For those that find desert settings and movies interesting, my prescription is The Four Feathers. For those that also like to add a little science fiction into the desert, Stargate. And for those that take an interest in the theme of hero worship and would like to keep things in a desert for some reason, my prescription is Lawrence of Arabia. I'm Dr. Balthazar. Thanks for the view. Like what you like, don't you don't. It's all your call, Kemosabe. Take it easy, everyone.